All right. I believe we're live now. So, hello, Internet. Welcome to another Serverless Day meetup. My name is Marek. I'm here together also with Sarah. So, Sarah, maybe you want to introduce yourself really brief?
Hi everyone, nice to have you all here in this meetup this evening. My name is Sarah. I am one of the co-organizers of Serverless Days Amsterdam. So welcome everyone, and yeah, let's get it started.
Awesome. Great. So, let me just very quickly share my screen right now. Hope that you can see this correctly right now.
Yeah, looks
As
good.
always, all right, good. So for those of you that have maybe never joined Serverless Days and what are wondering, what am I doing in this channel? We're a meetup group that organizes monthly meetups centered around serverless. So not specifically around one vendor or one technology or anything like that, but basically anything around the topic of serverless and the hype of serverless, if you want. You're now, of course, in our March meetup. And yeah, this is, as we all know for over a year already, this is, of course, still an online edition because we cannot get together yet, unfortunately. Hopefully, by the end of the year, we'll be able maybe to do physical meetups again. But until that time, you will still be able to enjoy us from the comfort of your couch or wherever else you might be, right? So you're very welcome here to attend another one of our virtual meetups. We're typically aiming to organize these meetups on the first Wednesday of the month, right? So we found actually that's a good cadence for people to attend it. And also wanted to give you just a very short update actually on what the agenda is for tonight, right? So for tonight, we've got two pretty interesting speakers to talk to you about very different topics. We'll have in just a couple of minutes, we'll have Angela kicking off, who will talk about DynamoDB and more advanced patterns that have been that she's worked with there. Well, then, depending a little bit on the timing, we'll have a break sometime, probably just a little bit before 7. Normally, we'd offer you some food and some drinks, but you'll have to get it yourself still, right? So you can maybe take a short break or something like that and refresh yourself for the next talk. And then probably around 7 or so, we'll have Christian join us to talk actually about a very interesting and, I'm curious about this topic. He's going to be talking about how to actually combine serverless and SAP together. And then around, 7:45 or so, we'll have a closing as well of the session. Sarah, you wanted to add something?
No, just to say that I think both talks today are super interesting, and personally, I was looking forward to this event. So yeah, eager to listen to our speakers today.
Absolutely, no pressure, right? No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Good. Just a couple of super short things before we continue. So even though this is a live event and online, we still have a couple of house rules that we would like you to follow. There's also there's house rules and there's a Discord channel. I should say it actually in that type of order. So you can find us on Discord, where we actually have a community where you can ask serverless questions. We often have some of the speakers hang around there as well, right? So it's a nice community for you to hang out on. This is the slide where I just wanted to quickly highlight the code of conduct, right? So like I was saying, it is an online event. We still want you to basically, kind of adhere to the code of conduct. It's nothing scary. It's nothing weird. It just basically means be a pleasant, contributor and visitor to the meetups, and don't do anything to harass any other people through chat or any other nasty ways, right? So there's a Discord channel, and please follow the rules that we have over here. And the last thing actually I wanted to share before we hand it to the first speaker is that as we are a community-based event, and as we're also, trying to basically cover anything around the topic of serverless, we're also always looking for speakers. So, if you're especially if you're a first-time speaker that maybe would like to actually, you've built something really interesting, maybe your first project, or you've done something really unique, or you just want to showcase it to the world, feel free to reach out to us, right? You can do that through Twitter, through Discord, or through email. We're also always looking and very open to people that want to help us, for example, organize, right? So we are still planning. We don't have firm plans yet for a conference this year, And whether that will be virtual or physical, no one knows, I guess, at this point in time. But also, if you're looking to organize or contribute in some other type of way to our group, please feel free to reach out as well. And as it's saying here as well, any other ideas, anything maybe you think we should try, or any cool speakers that you know, or anything else that you would like to maybe share with us, please feel free to reach out. We're always happy to engage with the community and basically make this as cool as an event as we can possibly do, either online or offline. That's what I wanted to very briefly to share now, also not to cut into the speaker time. Let me just check. Do we have the speaker live already and good to go?
Yes, so let's get to the juicy part of this event, which is the talks that we were looking for. So Angela, you're gonna talk us about DynamoDB. Please start. I want to see this.
Yes, all right. Cool. I will just go to my presentation so that and everyone can see my slides now. I can't see you, so is it still working? Yes, okay. I got the confirmation. Sorry about that. All right, so yes, today I'll present to you about Amazon DynamoDB, and we'll talk about some advanced data access patterns using real-world data. Before we jump into the presentation, though, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Angela Timofte, and as some of you might be able to tell from my last name, I am originally from Romania, but I moved to Denmark 9 years ago. I work as a data platform at Trustpilot, and I've been with the company for 6 years. Actually, this month is my work anniversary, and all I can say about that is that time flies when you enjoy what you're doing. But besides my day-to-day work, I'm also constantly talking about serverless architecture or serverless databases. So that's how I got to be recognized as an AWS serverless hero. And I'm also the coordinator for the AWS community in Copenhagen. So if you are interested in coming and talking at one of our meetups, please reach out. If you want to stay connected and talk more about serverless or databases or anything for that matter, please follow me on Twitter, connect on LinkedIn, or also if you want to see what I do in my free time, you can follow me on Instagram as well. But now let's look at the agenda that I prepared for you today. So we'll start with a short introduction about Trustpilot. I'll go with the assumption that all of you heard about Trustpilot, so I'll keep it very short. Then we'll look at our journey with DynamoDB. And after that, we'll jump in the main topic of today's presentation, which is modeling real-life data using DynamoDB. In the end, we'll look at the benefits and the downsides of working with DynamoDB, and I also left some time for you to ask me any questions. So, who is Trustpilot? Trustpilot is an online review platform whose mission is to become a symbol of trust. We want our platform to be the place where consumers can find companies they trust and a place where they can share their feedback. At the same time, we also want to help businesses to engage with their customers and to improve their offerings. Trustpilot was founded in 2007, and since then the company has grown quite a bit. And here I'm sharing with you just one metric, which in this case is the number of reviews collected over the years, and you can see this has been increasing over the years quite significantly. And from a business perspective, this kind of growth is amazing. And it's great to be able to say that this is the type of scale we have. But of course, when it comes to the tech, this kind of growth came with a lot of issues and challenges. And for that reason, at Trustpilot, we are always looking at tools and services that can grow with our business and that can scale with the data that we have. With that in mind, I want to just quickly talk about our journey with database in general and also with Amazon DynamoDB. At Trustpilot, in the beginning, we actually started with a MySQL on-premise database. Then we moved to the cloud. Then we moved all of our data into a MongoDB. And after that, we started looking at Amazon DynamoDB. But the reality was that the transition from MongoDB to DynamoDB, it hasn't been that smooth for us. And one thing to keep in mind is that we actually started to look at DynamoDB around 2017, when there weren't that many videos or any tutorials to see how to use DynamoDB in the best way possible. So we kind of had to jump in and try to use DynamoDB in the best way we could. And that wasn't really the case in the beginning. And one misunderstanding that we had in the beginning was that we're looking at Amazon DynamoDB as just a key value store. And I'm actually pretty sure we were not the only ones. And funny enough, Amazon now is always mentioning that DynamoDB is a key value or document store. And the thing is that when you look at DynamoDB, you don't see how flexible it is and how you can store your data so that you can do these more advanced patterns using DynamoDB. And that was definitely our problem in the beginning. We were just using DynamoDB to store some very simple use cases and not store that much data because we couldn't really see how to do that. And that's why the main topic of today's presentation is to look at how we can model some data using DynamoDB, because even now, I still see the biggest challenge when working with DynamoDB. So for today, I actually prepared a scenario that I want us to look at how we can model this into DynamoDB. And this screenshot is a simplified version of what we have on trustpilot.com. This is part of our category page. So if you navigate to trustpilot.com categories, you can see this type of information. But for today's presentation, I had to simplify it a bit because I don't have that much time to go through all the data that is there. But I try to simplify it and still keep the principles that we need to actually learn from how to store data in Amazon DynamoDB. So if we are looking closer at this page, what we need to do is to get a list of businesses for a specific category. And then we need to filter by the country. And in this case, I want Netherlands. And then also to filter by the status of the company, which can be claimed and unclaimed. And my list needs to be ordered by the number of reviews. And then the other thing that we need to get is the list of categories a company can be in, because a company can be in one or more categories. So that's other data that we need to get. And now, if we are looking at the data we have to store, is we will have a business unit ID, we'll have a list of categories, the identifying name, which in our case is the company's URL, the number of reviews, the status, and the country ID. And if we were to answer to these queries that we have to make using a SQL type of database, it would look something like this, where we say select businesses from our table where the category equal clothes, and country equal Netherlands, and status equal claimed, and I want this to be ordered by the review count in descending order. But now if we are to answer this type of query using DynamoDB, let's see how we can store our data. And here I'm just sharing how this data can be stored in DynamoDB, but let's look closer at what I'm doing here. So first of all, I have a partition key in which I'm storing the ranked category IDs. And then I have a sort key in which I'm putting the country ID first. Then I'm putting the status, followed by the number of reviews. And in the end, I'm storing the identifying name. One thing that it's important to keep in mind is in DynamoDB, your primary key needs to be unique. So in my case here, my primary key is a combination between the partition key and the sort key. And the way that I'm making this unique is by adding that identifying name in there. I actually don't need that data for my query, but I need to make this unique because you can simply have two different companies in the same category, in the same country, with the same number of reviews. So the way I'm making this combination unique is by adding the identifying name. And then the other thing that I have in my table is the business ID, which is set as an attribute. But now going back to the query that I want to make, for this one, I actually don't need the attribute business ID, so I'll just keep that aside for now. But if we want to do this query using this table in DynamoDB, if we were to use the console, we'll have the partition key set to clothes, and then we have the sort key in which we select to have the begins with. And for the sort key, you can choose between different computations that you can do. In our case, we want begins with, NL, and then claimed. And I want this list to be ordered descending. And if I'm pressing start, then the results that I'll get are these ones, where my partition key equal clothes, and then the sort key begins with NL and claimed. But one thing, when we look at these items, we can see that the order is actually not correct. And the reason for this is that our sort key, it's actually a string. So in this case, we are going to compare the first digit in the number of reviews. So in this case, we'll compare 2 with 1, and that's why we're getting this order. And we actually had this issue when we stored the data in DynamoDB. And in our case, the way that we fixed it was to put zeros in front of the number. And for us, it was very easy to make this change because we are refreshing this data every day. So it was very easy to look at the largest number we have for a review count, and then we know how many zeros to put. And if we do this, then the correct order of items will be returned. But it's definitely something that you need to keep in mind when storing your data. If you are to store numbers in your sort key, and you also add other items in there, so the sort key becomes a string, then this will be an issue for you. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. But moving on to our other query that we have to do, and again, if we were to do this in a SQL type of database, it will look something like select the categories from our table where the business ID equal 1, 2, 3. So if we were to do this type of query in our table, now we need the attributes with business ID. And to make this query in DynamoDB, we actually need to create a secondary index. And for our secondary index, we are going to select business ID as our partition key. And you can also add a sort key for your secondary index, but in our case, we don't need the secondary index. And then the other thing that you need to remember with secondary indexes is to select the right projection. And in DynamoDB, you have 3 different types of projecting your attributes, which is all, and that will include all the attributes in your index. Then you have include, and in include, you can specify the non-key value attributes that you want to have in your secondary index, or the third one, which is keys only, and that's the smallest index you can create. And the reason why it's very important to think about the projected attributes is because you want to make your indexes as small as possible so that you only use the resources that you need and you don't copy data in your secondary index if you don't need it. But in our example here, actually the projected types would not make a difference because we don't have other attributes in there. So if we create this secondary index, and then this is how our data is going to look like. And if we want to query this index, we'll use business ID equal 1, 2, 3. And then if we press search, then these are our results where business ID equal 1, 2, 3, and we get the PK and SK. And we can see in the partition key, we get that list of categories. And this is what we expected. But now if we are going back to our table and we look at how we store the data, you can see that for my primary key, I just said the partition key should be called PK and the sort key should be called SK. And the reason why you want to keep this naming quite generic is because if you, for instance, want to add some more filters on your page, the mistake we've done actually in the beginning when we started to store this data is that we made the sort key very specific. We're actually saying in the sort key, we're storing the country, the status, the number of reviews, followed by the identifying name. So when we had to introduce a new filter, we actually created that as another attribute. And creating that as a different attribute means creating another secondary index. But if we keep this quite generic, then it means that if I'm introducing another filter and I need to store the data for my access patterns differently, I can still use my primary key where I will say, for instance, let's say we introduce here a different filter for number of reviews, let's say. Then if I need to start only with the number of reviews, I can still put my information in the SK because it doesn't say what it's in there. I just know if in my query, then I say begins with this other data, then that's what I'm going to receive. So it's actually quite important to keep this generic so that you don't have to create other access patterns as secondary indexes. And of course, then it comes the other problem with like, how do you know what data you have in there? And one way that we did it in a different table, for instance, where we had data for like multiple dashboards, we put in the beginning the name of the dashboard that query was for. So that's kind of how we try to put some flags to know easier how to access the data. So now if we look at the benefits and downsides of working with DynamoDB, I will start with the benefits. And the first one is that DynamoDB is highly scalable. And that is honestly the most important things for us, to have databases that can scale with our load. And actually, I was asked last week, I was making a presentation about databases, and I was asked, how do we try to predict how much data we are going to get, and then, like, based on that, to take the decision on what type of database we're using. And the nice thing with DynamoDB actually is that it can scale so much that I don't see us hitting any limit anytime soon, and that makes it the perfect solution for us, because we will not have to refactor all our code over, like, again, because as I mentioned, we kind of had a few databases transitions. So with DynamoDB, it's a tool that can grow with us, which is definitely a benefit. The other thing worth mentioning as a benefit is that DynamoDB is fully managed. And I can say from a business perspective, it's perfect to use fully managed services and, of course, databases as well, because then you don't need to have people that only take care of like versioning your databases and making sure you have the right provisioning and so on. You can enable everyone to do other things that are important for your business and let Amazon take care of managing the database. And the other thing that, from a developer's perspective and from my perspective, that DynamoDB is great when it comes to the fact that it's fully managed, is that it enables more people to work with databases, because now you just need to click a few buttons or create a cloud formation, whatever you use to create your DynamoDB, and then you have your database there, and you can set your access patterns and go and use it. It's very easy and very fast for you to create your database. But now moving on to another benefit is the fact that it's fast and consistent, and of course you want that. Then it's also cheap when looking at the price. And I know some people will say that DynamoDB can become very expensive very quickly. And I will say to that of course it can become expensive, but I usually say that if you see your DynamoDB being very expensive, you probably want to go and look at how you configured your data and how you set your access patterns, because almost all the time you'll find that you are doing something wrong. And that's something that I do from time to time with Trustpilot. I go and look at our tables and check the ones that are very expensive. And almost all the time I find something that we're doing wrong, and that's why it's more expensive. And even when you're doing some of these mistakes with DynamoDB, I would say that it's still much, much cheaper than some of the other traditional databases that you can use. So that's why I always put the price as a benefit with DynamoDB. The other thing that DynamoDB is bringing, which is always amazing, is that it's the fact that it has built-in security, which is something that you want to look for. And it's also perfectly integrated with other AWS services, which makes it the perfect solution if you want to build serverless applications, or if you want to have event-driven architecture, because it's very nicely integrated with all the other services offered by AWS. But now let's also look at some of the downsides of working with DynamoDB. And the first one that I want to mention is the fact that it takes time to learn how to set data correctly in DynamoDB. And if you want your team to start using DynamoDB now, or yourself, you want to start using DynamoDB, definitely give yourself time to practice, because it does need quite a bit of practice to see how to set your data correctly. And for instance, in the scenario that I shared with you today, I just show you how the data was set in the beginning. And then, of course, it's much easier to go from that to see how you query. But even for this scenario, when I was setting the data, as I mentioned, I made some mistakes in the beginning, but it also took me a few trials to see how I'm combining my data to actually be able to query the way I wanted. So it definitely takes a bit of time to see these patterns and to see how you're setting your data correctly. And I would definitely encourage everyone to go and watch some of the talks from AWS about access patterns. There are quite a few now, not like back in 2017 when we were trying to learn DynamoDB. I also made more talks about access patterns in DynamoDB. I also had a talk at reInvent in 2020. So definitely go and watch some of these talks. Also, you can practice more using the NoSQL workbench that Amazon created. And yeah, it's, as I said, it takes time, but I think everyone kind of starts to see this, and that's why there is a lot of material there that can help you. And then the other downside with DynamoDB is that these access patterns can become quite difficult depending on your queries. In the example that I showed you, I only showed like one of the query that we have, but in reality we have more queries in there, and that means we need to store the data in many different ways, and it can become quite difficult to understand what's happening. And I've definitely seen this when we moved our like some of our data to different teams and to teams that didn't had that much experience with DynamoDB. It was quite difficult for them to understand some of the access patterns. So again, it's something that you need to consider. Sometimes you might even want to split your data in multiple tables if it becomes too complicated to follow the patterns in one table. But as I said, like one way of keeping things organized in DynamoDB is by setting some of these flags, or like have documentation in place and so on, so that others can also understand and read what have you done in there. And with this, I want to say a huge thank you for listening to me. I hope you learned something today from this short presentation. And with that, I want to jump into the question part and hear if you want to ask me anything.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angela. I really love the presentation. And I love also that you also showed the examples and you took it from your own experience in your own company. So I think that is really helpful, I guess. And I also resonate with what you said. Like, time flies when you are when you're enjoying what you're doing. I am very similar, so I completely understand. Sometimes it's a bit weird because 3 months look like a decade, and at the same time, like a day goes very quick. So especially during a pandemic, this concept of time is a bit all over the place. But so I have a question for you, actually. One of the topics that you mentioned during your presentation was, so you presented like a table that contained different data of different like entities of your applications. And I believe that I think this is the concept of like putting all the data in one table together and try to see like what are the access pattern for this table. So a single table design is something that can be a bit confusing for people, for the majority of people, because they come from a relational database background, so they are more familiar with using like MySQL or PostgreSQL. So I think, how did it work for you? So what helped you when you approached DynamoDB, doing the switch into the mindset of like having like a relational database with multiple tables, going to like NoSQL database like DynamoDB with a single table? So how did it work for you?
Yes, so for us, we kind of were forced, to be honest, into using DynamoDB, not from like a company perspective, but the scale that we had. It's the fact, like the main factor in us going for DynamoDB. And as I said, like we started quite early with DynamoDB, and we definitely didn't like it in the beginning, to be honest. And we're just looking at the beginning, like how can we scale more our other types of databases, but the scale, it kind of forced us to look more into DynamoDB and invest in there. And yeah, going from like that's why even in my presentation I kind of tried to show the SQL query, because that's how what people are used with in reality. Like that's what we've learned previously, and it's also, it makes sense, I think, in our brain much easier to connect with that kind of querying. So that's why I started with the SQL statement, and then I go from there. And for me, that's the way that I look at storing my data. I'm looking at what kind of queries do I need to make, and start from there. Like I'm looking, okay, this is my query, so how am I able to store my data in a way that I can answer to that query? And that's very important with DynamoDB. You need to set your data very specific to your queries, because that's like, some people might say that's a disadvantage of DynamoDB, that you can't do like joins, or you don't have the flexible queries, right? But if you want a highly scalable database that it can answer very fast to your queries, then yeah, you need to to learn how to set this data correctly.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for the explanation. And then I have also another question for you. So, and this also is something that I experienced one of the first time that I was working with DynamoDB. How do you? So it's very important that you set you also mentioned the importance of like keeping a neutral name from the primary key, so the source key, and like the primary keys in general. How do you, apart from that, how do you handle the fact that the data, the structure of your data can change over time? So how do you handle the primary key or the source key that need to like they need to change somehow because of a new business feature or other reason? Can you share your experience with that?
Yes. So, I mean, one thing with the data nowadays, you kind of need to get used with creating new tables, because it's also something that before people were kind of used like, this is our data, this is what we have, this is what we're playing with, right? But now nowadays, like, you can move your data quite easily from like one table to another, so create another table or something like that. At the same time, keeping this fields like neutral will allow you to add new data, new accesses, and in Dynamo, storing data is cheap, so that would not be a problem for you if you're adding more to your primary key. And the reason why you want to have it in your primary key and not create like more secondary indexes is because the main table with the primary key will always be there. So that's why you kind of want to reuse that part of your table all the time and keep that as neutral as possible.
Cool. We have some questions from the public. So Vini said, any new feature of DynamoDB that simplified or made your life easier compared to when you started using it?
That's a good question. I would say, Amazon is constantly adding more features to like all of their services. Sometimes it's even hard to keep up with all the new things. But they constantly like, I know one thing that they added is like supporting more types for your data, and that was definitely something that was a good addition. And then also for the sort key, in the beginning they were only supporting like doing like higher or lower than or something like that, and now they have these more complex types of getting your data, like begins with or others there. And then of course there are also the other features that I didn't touch on this presentation at all, like the DynamoDB accelerator, when you need to get your data even faster. I think that's like amazing. Or like the streams, and the streams is also like a feature that they've added, which now we're using quite a lot.
Awesome. Then we have one last question for you. So this question is from Rob, and Rob says, thank you for the great presentation. A question is, how do you connect a data warehouse to DynamoDB? Do you have tips or best practices for this?
Yes, so actually at Trustpilot, we are multi-cloud. So our data warehouse is in GCP, so in Google Cloud. And we are using BigQuery for our data warehouse. And we have multiple ways of getting the data from Amazon to Google. And I think that's like a topic in itself that I could talk about for like half an hour. We get our data from DynamoDB into our data warehouse in Google. And just quickly to say why we're doing that is because we believe in using the right tool for the right job. So in our case, we wanted to have Google as a provider as well, so that we use some services from there where it makes sense.
Cool. I don't think we have any other question. Just a thank you for answering from the attendees. Thank you so much. I think it was very informative, and I was also like, I think it's one of the best presentations on the topic that I've seen. So thank you very much.
Oh. Thanks for being
thank you so much. Great talk.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
So after this great presentation, there is just before moving forward with a break, I just want to remind everybody that we don't only organize meetup events, but we also organize a conference. We don't have any plan yet, so we start just now preparing and planning, so there is nothing concrete. But if you are interested in joining us as organizers, so we are like a team of people that organize this in their free time. If you're interested in helping out in any way, feel free to get in touch, either via in Discord or on Twitter, or you can send us an email. We shared the email before, so feel free. And yeah, so now what we're gonna do is to have like a 5-10 minutes break. I would say 5
Yeah.
or 10. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
5 minutes, something like that.
yeah, and then we will come back with another super interesting topic, which is serverless and SIP. And I would not want to miss this one because I'm super curious to see how that is going to be. So see you soon in 5
Yeah.
minutes.
See you in a bit. Cheers.
And we are back. So
Yep. Welcome back, everyone.
Hope you had the chance to stretch a bit, to drink some water, to go to the toilet, relax, whatever. So let's start. And for this talk, we will. So the next speakers will be Christian, who will be talking about serverless and SAP, which is a very interesting combination. So I'm looking forward to hearing and listening to the talk. And yes, Christian, please feel free to start, introduce yourself.
Okay.
Whenever you want.
Yeah, then let's start. I will just put presentation mode. So everything should be fine now. Great. Okay, so welcome to this talk about serverless and SAP, probably a very uncommon topic, bringing those two things together. Let me shortly introduce myself first before I start with the talk. My name is Christian Lechner. I'm a principal consultant at MSG Systems, and my origins are indeed within the SAP development and architecture place. So I can develop ABAP, for those of you who know that shiny language. But over the last couple of years, I moved on towards cloud native development in the SAP area on the offerings of SAP. So the SAP Cloud Platform, which is kind of the same thingy as Azure or AWS, just a little bit smaller, less features. And also in the non-SAP area, where I personally focused on Microsoft Azure. And yeah, during this journey, I really fell in love with serverless, especially, of course, with Azure Functions. And now, let's see if this will be the shortest talk ever, or if we can bring SAP and serverless together. Well, spoiler, it will not be the shortest talk. I will first talk a bit about the world of SAP and the topic of extensions, because that's a super important area when you deal with SAP. And this area has extended a lot, and this is where serverless can come into play. And in order to prove that, we will walk through a little scenario, kind of a business scenario for an extension of an SAP system. And then we will dive into the system and see what we can do using an offering of SAP called Kyma that is managed on the SAP Cloud Platform, and how we can combine SAP with Microsoft Azure Functions in order to leverage serverless functionality from there, and see what we can build there, what cool stuff. And then I will wrap up things, and we have hopefully time for Q&A. Yeah, let's start. So how does an SAP system typically look like? So for those of you who have worked with SAP before, I guess, you kind of are aware of this architecture. So we have our big monolithic SAP system, usually living on premise, and we have several layers in there. We have our database, we have our application layer, our interface layer. And this is what you get when you buy SAP. You get this stack, and you get some standard processes that are delivered with SAP. I mean, it's standard business software, so you have an enterprise resource planning in there. But the standard processes usually do not perfectly fit for a customer. So they use the standard processes, but they want to bring some own flavor into those processes. And in order to do that, they build extensions. So they build logic on top of SAP, making use of SAP functionality, maybe even overwriting SAP functionality in a very managed way, in order to enhance the application, the user interface, and even the database. That's one option. The second option is the kind of not so good path how to extend an SAP system, but sometimes that's done. That's so-called modifications. This means that you really take the code of SAP and just overwrite it. Because in an SAP system, you have access to the ABAP code, and you can simply overwrite it. That's also an option, not the best option. Now, this type of extensions are essential for for businesses, for the companies that use SAP, but they also come with a lot of drawbacks. So you are kind of very tightly coupled with those extensions into your SAP system, and you're kind of also coupled to the release cycles, and SAP is not really, let's say, DevOps-like. So usually a new release of a customer system is done every half year, maybe just once a year. So that's nothing where you can really do innovative stuff, where you can do experimentations. And that's also something that the SAP is quite aware of. And that's why they opened up, let's say, the playing field for making those extensions. And that's already quite some years ago, where they come up with the idea that originally comes from cloud software as a service, namely putting the extensions side by side to the core system. So what we have here is, let me just put in here the laser pointer. We have our classical S4 system with our extensions. They will still be there, but we will also have extensions living side by side. Here it's purely SAP-centric, this picture, of course. We will use SAP Cloud Platform, or how it's called now, SAP Business Technology Platform, in order to make those extensions. So they are no longer coupled or closely coupled to our SAP system, like an S4 system or an ECC system, but they are living kind of lightweight, decoupled side by side. And in order to make that reality, what we have or what we need are open APIs and business events. So SAP heavily committed to say, okay, we want to enable this scenario. And in order to do so, we offer APIs and business events from our classical S4s, from our classical SAP systems, in order to allow you as a customer, as a partner, to build those extensions. Now, taking a look at these two terms, business events, open APIs, this is something where, where I would say, can we make this thing reality? And as we are dealing with business applications, so we really want to focus on the business logic, can we make that reality by using serverless? Now, in order to check if that's possible, let's take a look at a little scenario for an extension that we will walk through and that we will try to implement within this session. So let's start with one super classical process within an SAP system. That's an order process. So let's say somebody commutes home, as we did in the old days before the pandemic, and well, he gets aware, well, I have to order a birthday present for somebody, and I order that via a mobile device. And I really hope that this one arrives soon, because I need that urgently. Now, usually when you do something like that, well, there is a happy path. So the parcel will arrive and the good is shipped and the fulfillment is perfect. But there is also the not so happy path, where the order is delayed. Now, this is something that is a standard process. So you have the order fulfillment process within your system. And at some point in time, the system says, due to some issues in the supply chain, well, the order is delayed. And that's where the standard process ends. Now, the point is, if you're a customer, you're not really happy with just not knowing that the order is delayed. Maybe you get an email, but that's already an extension. And that's also not super cool to just get an email that's saying you, hey, the order is delayed. Hope you're happy if we ship those stuff later. Or you get nothing. So this is, from my perspective, a very good scenario in order to check if we can make that an extension making use of serverless offerings. So what about doing the following? So I will just shortly check. We have our SAP system where the standard process is implemented. And this SAP system will raise an event, as we've seen before, that says, hey, the order is delayed. That's a standard process. And we will now build on top of that an extension. And we have some requirements for that extension. So what we want to do is we get this order event. So we first have to find out who is the customer who ordered that. And then we want to know, well, is this customer a loyal customer? Is has he or she already placed a lot of orders in our system, and maybe we have to react differently depending also maybe on the value of orders? And well, maybe if there have been orders in the past, have there also been delayed, and have there maybe been some complaints about those orders? So maybe we also want to check for prior complaints based on the order history, on the order IDs of these orders that have happened in the past. And we want to apply some sentiment analysis. So we want to check within this, let's say, central email inbox in the company. Not super realistic, but for the sake of the demo, let's assume that. We want to run a sentiment analysis on top of that. And based on all that information, we want to react on that. Basically, what we will do is we will do apply some business rules. Let's say, okay, how many orders have been delayed in the past? What was the order net value? How many complaints have been there? And so on and so forth. According to those information, we will then trigger some follow-up action, maybe an email that says, hey, you get a discount. Maybe somebody will really call you up because you're such an important customer, something like that. Now, that's what we want to achieve. That's what we want to do with our extension. Now, let's see if we can do that. Now, first, before I start with kind of the components that we will use, one remark. Everything that you see now that I show you within the consequent slides can be done by you without any SAP license costs. So you can really go start right after this talk with trying things out without any cost. Now you might say SAP without license costs, that's a good joke. No, that's really the case. So everything that I show you is completely accessible to you. Okay, then let's dive into the, let's say, techniques. What do we use? Now, first of all, we need an SAP system that raises the event and that says the order is delayed. And then we need some API where we can fetch the business partner, the person who placed the order. We have no SAP system and we don't want to spend license costs, right? So what about a mock of a Commerce Cloud system? Commerce Cloud system is a typical SAP system that is responsible for order processes. And there is a mock available for that one that's based on a framework called WARCAS that really exposes all the events that a real Commerce Cloud system has and exposes all the APIs that a real Commerce Cloud system has that you can use in order to build your extensions. And that's available on GitHub. You can download that, build a Docker container, run it, work with it. So that's step one. Then we need something in order to catch the event. So we want to trigger a function, right? Because we want to go serverless. And then this function should fetch the order details via an API call to the mock system. And in order to achieve that, we make use of the SAP Cloud Platform. So as I said before, that's the platform as a service offering of SAP. Again, there is a free trial for that one, so you can try it out without any cost. And there is one runtime within the SAP Cloud Platform, so one offering that is called Kima. And this one is the one that we will use. And the reason for that is the following. Kima is an open source project that was triggered by a team at SAP that made it open source from day one. And the goal of this environment is, as depicted here from the homepage, extend your applications with Kubernetes and create extensions. So it's all about creating extensions, making use of an opinionated Kubernetes stack, starting really from integration to the development of the application to the complete lifecycle management. Now, we will use a managed offering of Kima, but you can also deploy Kima to an AKS or to Google Cloud, or run it on-premise in your Kubernetes cluster. That's all possible. And as you can see here in the lower part, Kima is not pure Kubernetes. It's an opinionated Kubernetes stack that makes your life really easy, or at least easier as vanilla Kubernetes. So you have Kubernetes, you have some stuff here around logging and tracing, like Grafana, Prometheus, Jaeger, Loki, and so on. You have a little bit of IDP thingies like DAX. You have network stuff like NUTS. And you also have Knative in the game. And that's also where serverless comes into play. Now, why should we use Kima in order to build our extension? Now, there are 2 points, 2 key components that come along with Kima that really help you a lot with building such extensions. The first component is this little connector, the so-called application connector. That's a really Kima-specific component that really allows you to pair your core system, the system that you want to extend, with Kima by exchanging basically one token in order to do the handshake between the systems and establish a secure connection. Based on that secure connection, you can then very, very easily consume the events and APIs of this external system that you want to extend. We will see that in a second in the system. And that's kind of perfect if you want to build extensions, because all the mess is, how do I connect system A with system B? How do I make that in a secure manner? If I have more systems that I have to kind of bring together, I have even more headache to do that. That's all done by this application connector component. And this one is also nothing SAP specific. So you can even enhance WordPress with Kima if you want to. And the second point that comes along with Kima, where Knative comes into the game, is serverless. So you can really use functions and by this go down a very, very lightweight approach in order to extend your system. So what we will do now for the first part is we will now take a look into the system. How does this Kima look like? How does it feel like to consume the events within Kima? How does it feel like to call an API with a paired system? And then I will also call another system where we will not go into detail in order to get the order history. So that's kind of this 1, 2, 3 things that we will have a look now. So let's go out of the presentation and let's take a look at the system. So we go here. What you see now is the landing page, the central entry page of Kima. It's living on this thingy called Business Technology Platform, or for those of you who have heard something about SAP, that's formally called SAP Cloud Platform. SAP is great in renaming things without improving functionality, but that's a different topic. And that's the landing page where you see the roots of Kima, because you have namespaces, which is kind of a construct stemming from Kubernetes, where you can structure your applications. And here I have also deployed my Commerce Mock system. So it's living in Kima, like a container that's running there. And I have that open here. So it's a very lean UI. That simply shows the APIs and the events that are exposed by the Commerce Cloud. I have kind of reduced them a bit because otherwise we would see approximately 20 to 30 kind of APIs that you can use. But I've slimmed that down to the ones that we want to use. So we want the events, and we want to call this API within the Commerce Cloud. Now, how do we do the connection now if we use this managed offering? And that's really super, super easy. And that's one reason why I used Kubernetes or Kima for this demo. So now we are in the business technology platform, in the landing page where you have kind of some administrative stuff. It's like the, let's say, Azure portal. And here we can define a system landscape that we want to connect to our system. And here we have systems. And of course, my browser session is expired. Here we have the systems that we want to kind of connect. And as you can see, I did already some runs. I have connected that several times. And what you basically have to do is you have to register the system. You select the type. And now you see why I chose Commerce Cloud Mock, because there is a template for that one. So it's super easy to integrate. And when you do the registration, you get a token. And what you have to do then is you take the token, you put that in here where you have the connect button if you're not connected, and then the system is connected. That's all. The handshake is done, and the events and the APIs are available within Kima. Now let's check that. Within Kima, we have also an integration section where we can check, do we really have those services and events? And yes, we have them. So we have the events, and we have the web services. The events and the web services. Now, in order to structure the extensions a bit more, you can now bind those services from this dashboard to specific namespaces, because maybe you have different applications running within Kima, and the Commerce Cloud scenario that we want to do, this extension should only be binded to one specific namespace, as I've done here. So here you see I have done the binding with this CX extension namespace. Now let's take a look at that one. Here we have it. And we see, okay, we have one bound application there. So here within this namespace, we now have, let me shortly check, within a so-called service catalog, the web services and the events that we can now simply consume within our functions. Now, we kind of have overcome usually the biggest topic when you do extensions, namely the topic of integrating things. We have that. Now we can take a look at the functions. And functions are one way in order to develop logic within Kima. As I said before, that's a very important area within Kima, because you want to have really extensions that are very lightweight, that are very event-driven, and functions are a perfect vehicle to do that. And I have already prepared one function in order to do this extension. And yeah, what you see here is a JavaScript function that is running within Kima. Kima currently supports JavaScript 10 and 12 and Python as runtime for building such functions. So I have taken JavaScript because that's the one language that I'm quite familiar with in order to implement the function. Now I think it's really independent on which platform you're working. The concept of functions kind of is always the same. So we have our source code here. We have kind of dependencies when it comes especially to JavaScript, where we have our npm packages that we want to drag in. That's here. And then we have to configure what triggers this function. So what is the thing that makes this function run, and that's given here on the configuration area. And here we have exactly this order processing event that we want to use, which then tells the function, hey, an order is delayed. And as you can see here, that's exactly from the application that we've bound. And all that we have to do is, after binding, add an event trigger, select the event that we want to use, and all the magic wiring up is happening behind the scenes. Now we also want to make a call from our function back to the Commerce Cloud system. That's what we have here. So we have this API call that we want to do. And for that, we create a service binding. So we do not want to mess around with, let's say, OAuth flows or something like that. We just want to call that system back that we anyway have paired with Schema. So I just want to call an URL. And that's happening here within the service binding. So here I have bound the Commerce Mock Web Services, and I get several URLs that I can call them. That's kind of the configuration. Now for the code, as you can see here, I simply get this URL injected as an environment variable that you can see down here, where I have my values, and I simply can call the system. Now for those of you, and I think there are quite a few there, who develop, I don't think that you would really like to develop within a web-based IDE like this, building a function from top to bottom. So usually when you do that, what you want to do is you want to develop that with the editor of choice, like VS Code or something like that, and not within this cloud-based environment. And for Schema, that's possible. So there is a Schema CLI that allows you to do that. And this thing scaffolds your function and gives you all the bits and pieces that you need in order to implement the function. And I have exactly the function that we have seen here in my Visual Studio Code. And this is all that you need in order to develop the function. So as you can see here, we have the package.json where we have our dependencies in there. We have our handler function, which is the function code. And of course, Kubernetes is running underneath. So we, of course, need a YAML file. And we all love YAML, I think, where we specify when we deploy the function, in which namespace should the function go, which runtime should be used, where should the CLI pick up the source code that is deployed. And we can also inject environment variables. Here we can make use of everything that we have at hand within Kubernetes. So we can reference, for example, secrets. We can reference config maps. So that's all possible. So you have kind of the degrees of freedom that Kubernetes allows you, combined with a very well-defined way in order to define your function. Okay, so that's kind of it for the first part that we want to develop. So what we have is we have our function within Schema. As you can see, we have this function. We get the event in. From the event, we can extract the relevant information, like the order code, like the order status. And then, as you can see here, we can fetch the order details, especially the business partner number. That's what we want to know in order to get the order history. And this is really super easy due to the fact that we have this service binding. So what we have is we have this commerce URL, which is the environment variable that is injected by Kima. And we just have to build the URL string and then call it. That's it. We do not have to take care of any authentication stuff. That's all done behind the scenes for us. And then, just for the sake of completeness, we also get the order history here. As you can see, this is a system that is not integrated via service binding. So I have to do the OAuth flow here by myself in order to get the bearer token and connect to the system. So that's kind of the first part of the story. So that's what we wanted to do. And that's what we did. So let's shortly check where we are now within our journey of extensions. So we have our Commerce Cloud system at least mocked, but realistically mocked in place. We have that one paired with our Kima environment, and we also fetch the order history. Now, there was one more thing that we wanted to achieve, right? So we wanted to check the order history and then check if there have been complaints before, right? Based on, let's say, emails. Now, there are some points that we now have to take into account. Because the emails are probably not located in the SAP system, I would say, let's say they are located in some Outlook mailbox. SAP has no direct access to the emails, and I also do not want to have SAP direct access to the emails. And when it comes to sentiment analysis, well, SAP has no sentiment analysis service. And we also want to go serverless, so we cannot do that within SAP. So how can we achieve that with the stuff that we have already in place? Now, as I said before, I'm kind of heavily using Microsoft Azure. So I will focus on an Azure-specific way how to solve that. And I will use the following components. So in order to fetch the emails, I will make use of Microsoft Graph. That's an API that simply allows you to interact with each and every entity within Microsoft 365, be it Outlook, be it SharePoint, be it Teams, whatsoever. So that's one component that I will use in order to get my hands on the emails. When I have those emails, I want to have an sentiment analysis. And for that, Microsoft Azure offers another service that's called cognitive services. Here I have a text analytics service in there that can do sentiment analysis. And this is really a service. So I do not have to train a fancy machine learning model, wrap my head around anything of language processing. I just call the service, put in the emails, and tell the service, please give me back my sentiments. So it's kind of also serverless. And in order to glue things together, I want to make use of Azure Functions. Now, how would this complete our picture? So what we have now is we will make an additional call in order to get this complaint sentiment analysis for our customer based on the order history. And for that, we call Microsoft Azure. We call an Azure function, and this function should fetch our emails, making use of Microsoft Graph, interacting with Outlook mailboxes, take those emails, and then hand them over to this other service that's doing the cognitive service. That's a cognitive service that's doing the sentiment analysis. Now, this process already looks like a bit like a workflow, right? So we have a first step in order to get the emails, and if we have fetched the emails successfully, we then call the cognitive services. So from from an architectural perspective, it would be good to also model this with, let's say, 2 functions, each one responsible for one very specific task. So first function, get the emails. Second function, execute the text analysis. And we would really like to orchestrate that on a code-based way. And in order to do so, we make use of a little extension of Azure Functions that's called durable functions. Now, I don't want to go into the depth of durable functions because this would be probably a session on its own. It's just important for you to know that durable functions allow you on a purely serverless basis to implement a workflow, so a sequence of steps that you can execute in a truly serverless manner. And to do so, you have kind of an entry point in order to trigger the execution. And then you have the orchestrator that basically does what the name says. This little thingy orchestrates the single functions and activities that should be executed. So in our case, fetching the emails and executing the sentiment analysis. So yeah, let's take a short look into the code, how this feels like. Because that's quite the same feeling like schema functions, except for the added functionality that we have seen. So here we go. When you work with Azure Functions, there is one big benefit when you use Visual Studio Code, because you have an extension in order to build those Azure Functions. So you see a lot of files here, but most of them are not created by me, but are created by this extension. And we have now all the things here in place. So we have our orchestrator, and this one is really kind of self-explaining. So we have an orchestrator, which is a generator function. So for those of you who are in the area of JavaScript, this is kind of mimicking this iteration of the single steps within the orchestration. And then we have 2 steps in order to fulfill our tasks, mainly calling one activity, that's the get emails activity, and then calling the second activity, that's executing the sentiment analysis. And that's now, as you see, really this workflow, or the sequence of steps, is really modeled in code. So you do not have to model that in a graphical environment in order to make the workflow. That's purely code, and that's really powerful what you can do with that. And well, the activities, they are classical functions. So there is no secret in there. They just do their job. As you can see here, we have our Azure function, so our atomic building block, which executes the tasks that we want to do. So here we get the emails by interacting with the Graph API in order to get the email text, so the complete emails. And then what we do is within the other function, we simply call this AI text analytics service, or cognitive service, how it's called, in order to fetch the sentiments out of the emails, and then we do a little aggregation of all that stuff, and that's basically it. So we have everything in place here, and now let's see if we can also make that run, because that's basically the interesting part of the story. So does this work, or is this just code that's living locally on my machine? So in order not to fall into the trap of any cold start issues, I will do a little demo trick to warm up the function. Usually it works without, but usually in a live demo, it is a little bit too dangerous, at least for me. Okay, so let's start. We will now trigger an event. And this is the event where we binded our function to. So we will do an order processing event that says the order is delayed. We will raise that event now from our commerce mock, and then let's see what happens. The event has been created, and we have quite some execution happening here. So let's take a short look what happened. I think that's readable. Make it a bit bigger. So here we have the order number, we have the order status that is delayed. We have fetched the business partner by this call down to the commerce mock system. And then we also have our order history that I have prepared that has several other orders that are delayed. And then I have the sentiment result where I have 4 emails that I also have prepared. And I have 2 negative and 2 positive ratings. And now probably we would trigger some business rule evaluation that obviously has to be done. Now, yeah, mission accomplished from my perspective. So let's shortly check if we really did that. Yeah. So what have we achieved within the last 40 minutes? We have set up a Commerce Cloud system mocked. We have linked that to the Kima runtime, which we have created a function that kind of fetches the order information, the order history. And in addition, we have also here an Azure function that does some investigation within an Outlook mailbox and then executes a sentiment analysis. So quite some stuff that we have achieved. Now, shortly wrapping things up, because that was quite a lot that we did, but that also shows that a lot is possible within this, I would guess most of you think, let's say, dusty area of SAP. So the patterns of extending SAP systems have evolved a lot in the past years. SAP is no longer just doing ABAP coding, but it's a lot more now that you can do. And especially the side-by-side extensions that SAP is also heavily pushing open up for complete new opportunities in order to build cool business functionality. Now we have different offers how we can make use of that. SAP themselves offer a serverless environment with Kima. I have to be honest, it's still a young offering. It's used in production, but there are some edges around that. But we are not limited to that. We can mix in other cloud providers. I'm more a Microsoft guy, but you can also mix in AWS, Google, Alibaba, whatsoever. And with this really full-blown platform as a service offerings, we can really lift extensions within the SAP world to a completely new level. And there is one thing that's really important for the Microsoft part of the house. SAP and Microsoft also have a very extended partnership that was refreshed at the beginning of this year, where they want to enable even more. And they do not only want to enable that as a vendor, but they want to enable customers and partners to build those extensions and getting the barrier lower and lower for building such extensions. So, and with that, well, I thank you very much for your attention. I hope I had some new points for you to look at, some new aspects with respect to, let's say, Azure Functions and the SAP world. And with that, we can switch to Q&A.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks a lot. I am not like I don't come from a background of SAP as you did, so I think I learned a lot myself today by you. Thank you so much. I also appreciated the memes a lot. Austin Power, always appreciated. Loved it. I have a question for you. Actually, I have 2 questions. The first one is so as I mentioned, so you come from more of a background like of SAP for many years, from my understanding. So I'm curious, what made you grow an interest into serverless technologies? Like, what was like appealing to you? What made you like learn more about the topic?
Yeah, as I said in the introduction, I kind of switched to the first of course driven by SAP to this cloud native world, and SAP started with Cloud Foundry, which is quite comfortable for building applications, but I wasn't really happy with that because you already had to do a lot of things around the building of the application. So usually you want to focus on the business logic, but yeah, you had to do a lot within this Cloud Foundry environment. And so I kind of looked around, and well, everybody was doing AWS. So sorry for the AWS folks in the call. So I wanted to take a look if there is more. And yeah, I found more in the Azure Functions world. And that was something that really heavily resonated with me. You do not have to think about scaling or whatsoever that you would have to do within Cloud Foundry. So with Cloud Foundry, you have to define the autoscaler, you have to define the metrics, how to scale, and so on and so forth. And the beauty from my perspective with serverless is you do not have to care about that. And nice. Yeah, that's how I switched over to that area.
Awesome. I also personally love this side, so completely understand. So the second question that I have is, what do you think? So we saw a bit of the present of serverless and SAP. So I'm curious about your opinion. What do you think will be the future in terms of like what we will see in the coming years? How do you see this evolve also in terms of adoption? So what is your opinion on this?
So currently, I have to be honest, the adoption is not that great. Customers are still a lot working within this closed SAP stack, but they're running against barriers more and more. So especially the business departments, I mean, they work on a daily basis with, let's say, the Microsoft 365 stuff. In private, they work with, they have the experience from Amazon, from Netflix, from whatsoever. And they want to have more of this experience also in their work life, so to say. And that's why there is a lot of pushing from the business departments to make the systems easier. And the easiest entry point is always bringing in Microsoft 365 to the mix. Well, that's kind of to start with. And then they see, hey, we can do more. Hey, we can achieve more. And especially from the SAP perspective, which is not really B2C business. There is very rare customers have real B2C business. It's more B2B. It's more all these backend systems. But also there, the perception of the companies is getting more B2C-ish, so to say. So they want to have more of this nice functionality also in B2B processes. And so I think this will be picked up more and more. And I think the barriers, so SAP, AWS, Azure, they will get more and more fussy. So you will probably take the best of several worlds. I wouldn't say take the best of all worlds, because from my perspective, you will die managing a multi-cloud. But the mix will be more and more, let's say, refreshing in order to build such applications. And we are just at the beginning.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your perspective. Marek, do you have anything to add on your side?
Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for the interesting talk. Always very nice to see, what is the new fresh technology and what is the technology that companies are actually using, right? Let's be honest. There's of course a ton of SAP everywhere, right? So my question actually was a bit triggered. This is my personal question, a bit more on the technical side. I was curious and triggered a little bit by you saying, actually, SAP is not ABAP anymore. They're opening up. They're becoming, a little bit more integrated and taking their first steps there. You've shown us a very, interesting architecture today with using Kima and how you could actually connect Azure Functions to that. I was just kind of curious, like, could you do kind of more things, in between these systems, or for example, in front of an SAP system. The reason why I'm asking it is years ago, I personally worked with SAP, and I actually got very discouraged by it being, so proprietary. I remember things like RFC gateways and ABAP code, and a lot of, invented here kind of syndrome, right? As you
Yeah.
Is it nowadays a little bit easier that there's maybe things like, that you can talk with REST APIs against the system, or that it's no longer so, let's say, obscure and so specific, but actually something where you can start extending it? Just curious around your thoughts there, if they're making steps in that direction already.
Yeah, they are definitely making steps in that direction. Of course, they still have this kind of proprietary thingy in somewhere in the back of the head. But for example, when you say this RFC stuff, SAP, I think it's now 7 years ago, they implemented SAP Gateway as a way to expose functionality via OData. So and OData is kind of a REST-like way to interact with the SAP system. And that's now the preferred way in order to interact with SAP. So every system has a so-called SAP Gateway in its under its belt, and you can expose all functionality via OData now. That's also consumed by SAP themselves, because the user interface technology has also evolved. So it's no longer the sub GUI that you probably know, DynPros. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
DynPros, then there was Web DynPros, which was not very much better. They are now using UI5, which is a JavaScript framework. It's also open source, by the way. It's Open UI5 that consumes those OData services and allows you to build your UIs in a more user-friendly way. I mean, it's still business logic, so it's not sexy, but it's not the DynPro stuff. Awesome. Yeah, when it comes to integration, I mean, of course, SAP will prefer SAP technology in order to make the integration. That's for sure. But there are a lot of things how you can integrate with the SAP system. Let's say there is also, or there will come, an SAP Graph, which is kind of the counterpart of Microsoft Graph, to interact with the SAP system in a very structured way. And you can also call external systems, of course, from ABAP. You have an HTTP client in there. That evolved also a lot over the recent years, so it's not difficult to use it. And there is also, for example, an ABAP SDK for Azure. So you can interact with Azure services and enrich your ABAP with those functionality. So that's quite cool. So that they are opening up, but they have some way to go still. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the answer. I think I'll skip personally for the ABAP part. I've once taken a look at some of that source code, and I don't think that's something I can make sense of. But it's very interesting, I think, in general, that if with OData or like more, it's becoming more accessible, right? Like you can start. Hopefully, actually, people will start experimenting like you are, and sharing more about this as well, because I feel that personally that given how much SAP is still used, there's still a lot of potential, I think, to start, interfacing with it. It's basically everywhere. So I hope that people will start, I wouldn't say breaking down the monolith, but interfacing maybe with the monolith a little bit more.
Yeah.
That will have more people talk about this as well. That's a pretty topic.
That's something that's coming from my perspective. However, let's say I wouldn't call them filter bubbles, but I would say that the communities are not kind of connected that much. So there is an SAP community. There are a lot of SAP meetups, Stammtisches in Germany, for example, where we really talk about all that stuff and also talk about this integration stuff. But kind of these two communities have to meet a bit more to talk about the stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I'm super happy to have the chance to talk here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks again, of course, for the great talk and also for the wealth of information. Right? It's I think super interesting, especially as it's a non-typical topic, but I think one that's super interesting and has a lot of potential. So
yes,
yeah, maybe Sarah, to we can try speaking maybe as well at some point at a SAP meetup or Stammtisch, was it? Or what was it again?
Yeah, there are so-called SAP Inside Tracks. That's more like your format here. So there are meetups on Saturdays, where there is where you can propose talks. So that's especially also attractive for people who did not yet have a talk in public, to say so, because it's very, very friendly, very inclusive. And you have Stammtisches, of course. I mean, SAP is a German company. There are a lot of German SAP Stammtisches, and now all of them virtually, so you can have a lot of Stammtisch fun.
We have a compliment from the public. Vimi said, "Thank you for the talk. I learned a bunch of new services to go and check."
Yeah, that's cool. So especially take a look. Of course, Azure Functions are cool, but everybody knows them, I guess. Take a look into Kima, because that's something that comes from SAP. That's the company that's formerly called Hybris that SAP bought, and those guys are completely different than all the other SAP bots. So they push this schema out, and it's completely open source. So you can contribute to that one also.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much again for the talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you. Maybe once you have a new project or even further with this, we'd love to see you again, right? And we'll check out the Stammtisches as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super happy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. All right, so that's the end of our event for March. I just want to thank again both the speakers that really, I think today the talks were so interesting, but also the public. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for learning with us today. And yeah, I look forward to see you the next month.
Let's not forget. Also, let's thanks for the person actually being the. How do you
of
call
course. It? Oh my God! So we have like the Deus ex machina. I don't know how to say it. It's the English. Sorry, the Latin phrase. The broadcast orchestrator, who is Stacy, and she is in the background, but she's organizing everything with the speakers and the StreamYard and everything, and she did an amazing job. Like the first time I did it, it didn't go so well. So yeah, good job. Thank you so much, Stacy, and yeah, thanks so much.
Cheers. All right. Hey, and we'll see everyone in a month, right? So that's
yes.
when we'll organize a new meetup. So hope to see all of you back then as well for another exciting one. So
see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.